My name is Greg Ligon, and I am with Generis and on the Effective Ministries team, and along with my colleague Jeff Surratt. We've been working on multi-site issues for a long time. We had the opportunity to write a couple of books, one called Multisite Church Revolution, the other Multisite Church Road Trip, and most recently have written a book called Multisite Reimagined. We're thrilled to be here today to talk about some of the things that we feel like are going to be a part of the future of multi-site. As we get started, I'd love to introduce you to the folks who are on the call with us. First of all, we have Rick Miner, and Rick is on the executive team at Resi, and many of you are aware of the great work that they do in terms of streaming and all things electronic as it relates to multi-site. We also have on the call from Resi, Nate Anderson. Nate is the Director of Marketing, and so they'll be talking with us some about some of the things that Resi does, and we're talking with some of our other guests in terms of some of the technology things associated with the future of multi-site as well. We also have on the call with us today two folks from 12 Stone, and we've got Todd Nicholson and David Grant. David Grant is the Director of Ministries for Next Generation Ministries, as well as 12 Stone Home, and Todd is the Associate Pastor working specifically with 12 Stone Home. So we're going to have some opportunity to hear from them as we dive deep into some of the things that are happening in terms of Microsite. We also have with us from McLean Bible, Tony Aiello, and he is the AV Engineering Director at McLean. And then also we have from Hoboken Grace, Casey Combs. And there'll be, again, we'll have some opportunity to talk about some of the more technical aspects of what's going on with multi-site as well. So today, we're going to highlight some of the things that we've learned as we've had these conversations with many multi-site churches about the future of multi-site. We're also going to share with you some of the recent data. Actually, we're still in the process of collecting data on a kind of a new multi-site survey, and we're going to share some of those data points, some interesting things we're learning along the way. We're going to talk tech some, and then we'll do a deep dive on Microsite and hear some of the great work that they're doing at 12 Stone Church and their 12 Stone Home program. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Jeff Surratt.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys today on a webinar that we were talking about multi-site, and we're talking with some of the best tech people in the on the earth. Right as we came on air, my MacBook decided now is a great time to update all of its software. So it has restarted 5 times in the last 2 minutes. So we're doing this via iPad. So, you know, just so you guys know, I have the same challenges you guys do. Talking about multi-site today, Greg and I have been involved in multi-site for, gosh, it's been 20 years now. I got involved with multi-site through a church I was working at. We ran out of room. We couldn't figure out what to do, so we started another site back in 2001, and then just have kind of figured it out from there. And then in 2020, everything changed, right? I had an exchange this morning with a friend on Facebook who was saying, you guys are talking about the future of multi-site. He said, I've been hearing people talk about that for the last 10 years. I don't think anything's changed. And I thought, well, that's hilarious, because it sure feels like almost everything changed, especially in March of 2020, when all of a sudden every church in the world, almost every church in the world suddenly became multi-site. All of a sudden, rather than being a one-site church where everybody comes to a location and listens to somebody preach, we became churches that met in homes all over our community. And so what we're trying to figure out is, what are the implications from that? You know, some things will, as vaccinations come, as things get more normal, if there's a word for that, we'll see a lot of churches go back to kind of what they've done before. But there's also a lot of new opportunities. Some of the shifts that we've seen will be permanent. I think one of the things we'll see is that the idea of a 24/7 presence for a church, we'll see that continue as a demand thing. There'll be other things that are permanent. Other things we're going to shift that are going to be other things we'll see new innovations. Sorry about that. And so here's the question. Here's what we want to talk about a little bit today. We think, Greg and I think, that for every church, there's kind of 3 reactions you can have to everything that happened with 2020. Is kind of 3 paths. One is we can retreat. We can go, when's it going to get back to normal? When are we all going to be able to get back in our 1 building or our 2 buildings or our 3 buildings? When are we going to be able to do things the way we did before 2020? 2020. That's one path. I don't know that it's really the path forward, because as we all know, some things will never get back to normal. A second path that we could take is we're just going to hang on. We're just going to try to hang in there. And, while all of this is going on and we're open and we're closed, we're open, but we can only have this many people. So we're just going to hang on in this period of time and just see what happens next. What's exciting, though, is this third path of leaders saying, you know what, we're going to innovate. We're going to figure out what's next. We're already seeing incredible innovation. We'll talk about some of those different areas of innovation over the next few minutes together. But these are people saying, we're going to embrace what is next. We're going to look at the challenges, which are real. I mean, they're real challenges that are going to continue on. I read an article today that said we may be wearing masks until 2022. There's other things like that, but the opportunities are absolutely incredible. And so the survey that Greg mentioned a while ago, we started seeing results rolling in from the survey. Fascinating results, and it's kind of pointing to some of the innovations that we're beginning to see. Greg, you want to share some of what we're learning so far from this survey?
Sure, I do. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. We're just a couple of data points here at the beginning, and then we're going to kind of drive our way through as we walk through some of the different models. We'll share some other things along the way. But kind of first thing is just, again, getting another measure on, how many people are back live in person, right? And so it goes back to that current reality. The data that we had, I had as early as this morning, we're continuing to get responses in, but still we're hearing that 25% of those that have responded are not back in person. 13% still have less than 25% of what they had pre-COVID. 25% are in the 26 to 40%. 24% are 41 to 60. 9% are 61 to 80, and only 2% have greater than 80% of their pre-COVID attendance back in place. I'd love to kind of go to Todd and David and tell us a little bit about what's happening at 12 Stone. What is your live attendance looking like right now?
Todd, you want to hit that live attendance?
Yeah. So first of all, Greg and Jeff, thanks for having us. Those numbers are very in line with what we're experiencing at 12 Stone in our live experience. And we have the vast majority still engaging online through our home gatherings. But yeah, we would land, in 2017, we were probably about 18,000 people at one of our 8 locations. Roughly right now it's, it fluctuates week to week depending on rain and COVID, right? Like you never know what you're going to face. And so, but those numbers you just mentioned are what we're experiencing here. And that's why 12 Stone Home is working for us. So
that's great. Well, we'll dive into that here in just a little bit. Give a couple of other interesting facts and the data that we've got coming in. One is that 19% of those that were surveyed indicated they've closed a campus during COVID. But then the other data that's very interesting that comes us on the heels of that is that 48% are considering the addition of a new campus, and 24% are committed to adding a new campus. They're moving forward and adding a new campus. So we're seeing some very interesting kind of changes in terms of campus adoption as well. One of the things we want to move to for just a moment is to talk a little bit about some of the models that we're seeing. As Jeff and I, actually some of these things were actually happening pre-COVID, but certainly have been accelerated post-COVID during this last 12 months. But one of the first things we want to talk a little bit is about some of the digital experiences. As we've said, everybody, there were a lot of people who were already multi-site, but on March 15th last year, pretty much every church in America and around the world became a multi-site church because they were going into people's homes. And so this transition that happened was pretty rapid. We saw a lot of really great innovation early on, and people began to figure out how to do groups online and how to meet with students online and how to do care online and how to really begin to do some discipleship online. But then we also saw a pretty quick and rapid move back to energy that was focused on moving back into the building. And so some of that innovation, we feel like has been stalled out a little bit. there's a couple of things that I think that we can see that we learned from other industries in terms of the whole digital and the online opportunities. One of those things is Walmart. We were with a group of churches a couple of years back at Walmart, and they were actually, during that year, they were expending the same amount of money to develop their online presence as they were in adding actually new physical locations. And that has served them very well during COVID, during the pandemic. So this importance, it wasn't either or, but it's a both and. So I think that's one of the things we have to think about as we're talking about online experiences. The other thing that's kind of the $1 million question, another one of the ones, is how do you do engagement here? What does that actually look like? As you move to using some of the live feeds, another piece of data that we got off the survey said that 38% of churches are using just one feed that's going to all their campuses. 12% are actually using unique feeds. So there's a unique feed that's going to each one of their campuses that gives some specificity, gives some opportunity for the campus pastor to have some presence with their folks as well. We think that this is really an opportunity to take some significant advances in terms of online, to move from just pointing a camera at the screen and pressing play or pressing record. So we think there's some really great opportunities to really move from just viewing to really engagement. I'm going to pass it to the team at Resi to talk a little bit about some of the things they're learning in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So yeah, as Greg was mentioning, a lot of technology has kind of helped advance the kingdom in a lot of those ways. And so a little bit about our partnership here. So what we started Resi really because we wanted to go multi-site, but all the ways to get video to remote campuses was not reliable and oftentimes way too expensive. So what Resi does is we provide the most reliable multi-site infrastructure on the market, but we also provide the most reliable web streaming infrastructure as well, which Nate Anderson from our team will go into a little bit more here in a second. So really though, no matter what the future holds for churches, we exist to help churches communicate, engage their communities effectively, however they choose to reach them. And that's why we partner with people like Generis and Greg's team to provide guidance on those journeys. So we know that multi-site isn't going away anytime soon. We see more and more churches using this effectively. And so we also know that COVID accelerated trends that have been in progress. So not to replace multi-site, but to expand it from the paradigm of the church in the early 2000s to a church that is built for momentum and growth in the future. So we actually do, as we talk about that, we actually do have some guests here. Tony Aiello from McLean Bible Church will be joining us today. So I was going to actually interview him a little bit and talk about how they're using this technology in their church during some of these topics we've been going over now. So Tony, if you're there, we can go for it.
Great. So hi, it's nice to be here with you all. But over at McLean Bible Church, we've done a few things as COVID has happened just to kind of make the online experience better for everyone. A couple things that we implemented initially was just embedded live closed captioning, and then we did live interpretation into our broadcast as well, Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And then we also provided a unique player for our ASL community. So those are some things that we've done immediately just to address the need of the congregation online. Then for our locations, as COVID began, all of the buildings got shut down. And that gave us an opportunity to go into each one of these locations and install multi-camera systems. So with those multi-camera systems, we also put them we gave them all individual live stream capabilities so they could address their congregations directly. So those are some of the things we've done over here at McLean Bible Church.
Oh, that's really great, Tony. Tell me a little bit too, like how has your strategy overall been affected by COVID up to this point?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, how has your strategy been affected by COVID at this point?
It just accelerated our strategy, really. We've been working for ways to address the online community and all of the individual needs of people who don't speak English and people who can't hear very well. So because of COVID, we were able to just go ahead and just start implementing things immediately. And this has been huge for us.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I guess last thing, you kind of answered my technical setup question. So I guess the other one I had for you was, what are you guys excited about for as things return to the new normal?
Oh man, we're psyched to start getting volunteers back into the campuses to see the new technology that we've put in place and to just start discipling people again. Just having people be like, oh wow, we've got more cameras to operate. Oh wow, we can do this. Like it's huge for our tech teams. For a while, it's been kind of stagnant. And now we've got new stuff to attract new people into the teams and just really start working with them.
Oh, that's awesome. Great, Tony. Thank you so much for just your time today and sharing all that. Those are really great points and how you guys are using the tech and just really serving your church well, so, and your people. So hand it over to Nate. I think we're on to the next slide here. So.
Here at Resi, obviously we do a lot with online communities. We do a lot with online streaming. We used to kind of be known as the multi-site, church streaming company. This past year, obviously that's changed because everybody is thinking about how to transition to online. How do we form excellent online communities? And we know that an online stream doesn't necessarily mean it's an online community, and a viewer doesn't necessarily mean engagement. So an online community, it's something that's carefully cultivated. It's based on, a reliable infrastructure. It's based on tools that encourage two-way communication, encourage communication and engagement and interaction with your audience. And we've seen online viewership go up during COVID. Obviously, that's kind of a no-brainer. But we've also seen that doesn't also always mean engagement. If you take a look at, streaming to Facebook and YouTube, sometimes it can be misconceiving because you can tell leadership, hey, we've got 1,800 viewers, but how long are those viewers engaging for? If they're engaging on social media platforms on places like Facebook and YouTube, it can be as little as about 30 seconds. If you scroll Facebook for any time, on your phone, you see every third ad is usually, or every third post is an ad. And so Facebook's incentive is to not keep people on your stream and keep people engaged in your stream. It's how do we keep people moving on to ads and moving on to other content to get that dopamine hit and get them distracted. And so here at Resi and really just our community as a whole, we're always focused on, hey, what do we do to increase engagement? And that starts with streaming to your website. It starts with a reliable platform. It starts with working with others that are building tools that enable ministry leaders to form effective online communities. And a church that I think is really just doing an awesome job of that. We actually had a video on our blog with Dana a few months back, and I'm excited to invite Casey, who I believe, Casey, what's your title at Hoboken Grace?
I'm the production leader, so I report to Dana, technically.
Cool. Casey, can you just tell me a little bit, the way that you guys do online experiences, that changed in a big way during COVID. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh man, where to start? I'm going to try to get 45 minutes into about 2 minutes. So, yeah, obviously we took our entire experience online. I remember the very first week that COVID hit, the big question was like, how do we do this? And it was literally just cutting up old worship and putting it into ProPresenter and then streaming it to Resi, pretty much. But yeah, we began, towards the beginning of COVID, we actually began a morning show, believe it or not, that ties into what we call rhythms. So our rhythms are designed around basic things you can put into your life to grow closer to God, really. So reading your Bible daily, monthly things that you can do. And we started a morning show with our lead pastor and care pastor. One on Zoom and one in the room, which was interesting to stream live. So we began that at the beginning of quarantine and have not stopped and probably will never stop. So that's something that's been awesome we've been able to do. But since we've began quarantine, like the beginning was chopping up parts of old worship and having the preacher or pastor preach live and then edit that video and put it all together. And now we've gotten to a point where we're at this moment taking all pieces of worship, cutting it together in Premiere, making one video out of it, and doing something like a sim live event every week. And now we're at the point where we're testing out, like, okay, how do we get this? How do we get parts of our actually live in-person service into that stream every week? And that's something we're starting to test over the next couple of weeks. So
cool. So you guys have found that with the engagement of this online event that's tailored specifically to them, that you've gotten a lot better interaction and a lot better fruit from that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big things we've noticed with that is that it's at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, as far as the morning show. But the amount of people that we get to watch it after the fact, whether it be in podcast form on an Apple podcast or on our app or whatnot, the amount of people we get that not watching it Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. is a lot of people. And the same thing for our Sunday services. We have a lot of people attend Sunday during the normal 9:30, 11, and 12:30 services we have. But the amount of people we're having watching church at any time on YouTube or our app or on our site or wherever that happens to be that the content is at, it is a lot of people.
Cool. Expanding that online community, expanding that digital experience, not just for the Sunday morning paradigm, but throughout the week. Really love that. Cool. Awesome. I'll transition it back to Greg and Jeff. Thank you.
Go for it, Jeff. We're going to talk about on-site venues. You're muted.
Hey, one of the things that we've seen for a long time, this idea of on-site venues is kind of pioneered by North Coast Church in San Diego. Larry Osborne, they ran out of room in their auditorium, and so they just began to open other auditoriums on the same property, and each auditorium had a different flavor, a different kind of music, a different approach. And so a lot of people through the last 20 years, 15 years have kind of tried to adopt that approach a little bit, where they'll build different venues within their original building, and some have seen success, some have struggled a little bit with that on-site venue piece. But then with COVID, there was a rejuvenation of this idea, because all of a sudden we were limited. When we were able to meet in a lot of places, we were limited to maybe 25 people in a room or 50 people in a room. And suddenly churches began re-experimenting with this idea of what would it look like to be one church meeting in several rooms inside the same building, often streaming the video from one room to another room, sometimes with a live band in each room, and then streaming the speaking, different flavors of this. And we have seen a lot of interest reignite around this idea of venues. In fact, with the survey that we are working, or we're taking input on right now, we asked how many on-site venues for adult worship do you have on a weekend prior to COVID? And 44% of the people that responded said 3 or more. I would imagine during COVID that has gone up. Some of those venues will continue afterwards. Some will be language specific, maybe one with Spanish and another one with Mandarin. But there are going to be people who probably won't be comfortable walking into a 500-seat auditorium or 1,000 or 2,000-seat auditorium for a long time. So an opportunity in this idea of multi-site and venues is, what if we continue to offer smaller venues within our building where there are 20 people or 50 people? So that's one of the trends that we're beginning to see pick steam up again with this idea of on-site venue. Another one that we are seeing really pick up speed, and I think is going to pick up a lot of speed going forward, is the idea of church mergers. A lot of multi-site churches have actually merged with other churches, but the truth of COVID, one of the sad realities is financially, some churches just can't go on. They have struggled a lot in this time financially. A lot of churches have done really well. Some churches are even ahead of budgets, but there's a percentage of churches that were struggling a bit going into COVID that now are trying to figure out what's next. And Greg has conversations every week with churches going, how can we do this together? How could we be better together? And so there's a lot of opportunity going forward with figuring out how do we take a healthy church and some churches that are struggling and help them merge, rather than those churches just simply disappearing and going out of business. And then a third trend that we're seeing a little bit of traction around, and this is one I love, and I'm more a salesman than a reporter at this point. And this is the idea of what we're kind of calling multi-brand, and we've tried to come up with a better description of it. But it's the idea of being one church with different ways of doing church in different areas. It's kind of like, Greg, do you mind telling us a little bit about the Marriott story when you were able to visit Marriott with that team?
You bet. You bet. Marriott, you may or may not know, owns Ritz-Carlton, the Westin, Fairfield, Residence Inn. They have 32 independent brands, all driven by their understanding of the psychographic and demographic nature of the people who like those facilities. And so that's one of the things that we really feel like that's behind this idea of multi-brand in the church as well. This opportunity for, as we have greater access to data and understanding of the community that we're a part of, we're going to have the opportunity to be able to create more custom kinds of experiences that actually meet the felt needs of those neighborhoods, and not just neighborhoods now as we're thinking about online, but even the online, understanding our online audience as well. So it gives you the opportunity to have that consistent brand, that consistent kind of vision, mission, values, but really be able to drill deep and go and meet some very specific kinds of needs. And we feel like that's going to be happening. There's a couple of churches that have been doing it for a while. New Life Church in Chicago is an example of one. We just recently had a conversation with Brentwood Baptist in the Nashville area. Looks like they're doing it some. And really Seacoast, part of Seacoast's early story when they launched their Dream Center campus was they realized, okay, this is a very different set of needs that causes them to create a very different kind of experience for that campus as well.
Yeah, and I think one other trend that we're seeing that I think has a lot of traction is this idea of microsite. And the idea has been around since the New Testament, right? The idea of a house church or a smaller group of people. And there's been a lot of different ways of house churches happening in the U.S. and microsites. But with COVID, we're seeing an explosion in people that are interested in it. We see kind of two different models. One is the micro church model, where it's really a series of small churches, maybe connected in some kind of loose network, but they're all independent churches. Underground Tampa is one of the networks that is really well known. But what we're really seeing a new push into is this idea of what we call microsite, rather than an independent church. It's a site of a larger church connected to that larger church, but meeting in a home, in a coffee shop, in a community center. And the goal is not necessarily that site grow to be 100 or 200 or 500 or anything of that sort. And I'm really personally excited about this trend. I'm actually working with the church here in the Denver area that is going all in on this idea of microsite. They are a church that pre-COVID was growing very rapidly, adding another building, looking at adding a new site, a multi-site campus. And now they've said, you know what, we're going to put a pause on the multi-site campus piece because we really believe that these smaller groups meeting in homes bring a piece of the New Testament church that other size gatherings don't necessarily have. I experienced it a couple of weekends ago. I got a chance to go to one of the house churches, they call them, or microsites at this church. And when I walked in, everyone greeted me. Everyone was very, very friendly. We were eating some brunch and having some coffee. There was another couple there that had never been to anything at this church before. They walked into this group of about 20 people in a house, very warmly greeted. We watched a video of the service that was going on at the church, the main site of the church. People responded to the video. Afterwards, we had a brief kind of, not Q&A, but just, hey, threw out a couple of discussion questions. We all prayed together, and then we hung out, we talked together. And really, I walked away thinking, you know what, this is the best of both worlds. This is the best of a large church and what they can provide. This is the best of a smaller church and that environment. And so we're seeing a ton of interest around that. We're going to talk to 12 Stone in a minute. You guys are doing some amazing work on that. And Nate, I think, Resi, I think you guys have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to this idea of microsite. You want to talk to us a little bit about that, Nate?
Yeah, this is one that we're particularly excited about just because in what we offer in the churches that we work with, this is really the middle ground between, hey, we're going to operate with web platform, we're going to stream into people's homes, and we want to form a physical church and a physical group of people to congregate with. And I think microsite makes a great testing ground for multi-site too, where a lot of people look at the analytics from their web platform stream and say, this is amazing, we have this group or this large group of people that are meeting in this area, and how do we take advantage of that, and how do we get growth from that? And so, many churches, technically speaking, will start with the web platform, with Resi's web platform, because it is more reliable than any other RTMP method to stream into these locations, whether that's a bar or in extreme examples, or a school or a laundromat or whatever it is. And then from there they see that, hey, this is awesome, we're getting this larger group of people, we've got 50 people meeting here, and it might be time to do more of a traditional multi-site stream using Resi's multi-site platform that way instead, to form a permanent playback site. So just a really exciting thing that we've seen come out, and we really think is going to be something that we see happen after COVID, is how do we start thinking about these smaller groups. And I think sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think next we're gonna interview our guests on Microsite specifically, but I'll transition back to you first.
Yeah, thank you. So so David and Todd are with us from 12 Stone Home, and or from 12 Stone, and we're specifically going to be talking about 12 Stone Home and the work that they're doing there. And just have a few questions. One, I would love just for one of you, maybe David or Todd, either one, whichever you want, to kind of tell us how this came to be. Kind of what was the story behind it?
Yeah, well, first of all, Nate, it's not that extreme to have a home gathering, home church in a bar. That's where mine meets. So, so first of all, we're really humbled to be here and excited to be here. If it sounds like we don't know what we're talking about, the reality is we're learning as we go. It's that proverbial building an airplane in the air is what it really feels like. So if it seems unclear, it's because it's unclear to us too. And so we want to learn as much as we can encourage, and we're definitely in process. As everybody knows, the church was in decline before COVID, right? COVID accelerated that. We knew that across the country. We know that we're not reaching millennials, and now we got Gen Z to deal with and encourage and be a part of. And so there's a couple of guys on our staff who are like crazy futurists. They're like, okay, whatever it takes, let's just get to the future as quickly as possible. And so when COVID hit, we've been talking about how do we engage our people in really three areas, three functions: worship, community, and impact. And the worship part is a 12 Stone live kind of process. The community aspect is something that 12 Stone really struggles with. 12 Stone grew over the years by a come and see and hear the gospel and be baptized mentality, and God used that in extraordinary ways. I mean, I'm amazed at how God used that. And the impact piece is it's really blessing your neighbors. It's how do we get the church mobilized into neighborhoods. And so they saw COVID as an opportunity to basically say, okay, how do we think about church in a fresh way? Is there a way that instead of just getting people to come to a building, is there a way that they may have a better chance to connect in Christ-centered community around a meal, around, Jeff, like you experienced in Colorado, and can we help people get mobilized into their neighborhoods so they can actually think and pray about how do we bless our neighbors? And they tapped on my shoulder as somebody to help build that strategy. They kept talking to me about it, and I didn't get it. I'm kind of a closet Presbyterian, so being in the building, Lord's Day worship is a really big deal to me, and the sacraments and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm actually not closet, I'm pretty out in the open. But anyway, so I really struggled with the concept until I started going back and looking at Acts chapter 2 and recognizing that for the first couple of centuries, the church did meet in homes, and it seemed to be sufficient. And actually, the church was mobilized and actually seeing the gospel go forth. And so we started thinking about, what does this look like? How do we discover leaders who may be able to lead these home churches, house churches, microsites? Where can they be? Is it just in our region? How are they connected to our current campuses? How are they not connected to the campuses? What happens if one pops up in Dallas, Texas? How do we support that and coach that and come alongside them? So we've tried to, as quickly as possible and methodically as possible, respond to, we think, people's desire to do church in a fresh way. to actually say, okay, here's the deal: coming, sitting, and seeing something that's great, and then it's not changing my life, that's insufficient. And so it was unconscionable. The thing that kind of got me saying, yes, I want to be a part of this, is I started thinking about what's unconscionable in church. First of all, people disconnected. Okay, just coming and seeing, watching church is not being the church, which is a huge passion of mine, actually becoming and functioning as the body of Christ, the family of God. And the second thing is, believe it or not, here in the Atlanta area, there are people who have never heard the gospel. I have friends in my apartment complex. I live in an apartment complex on purpose to be around people that are far from God and different than me in all kinds of ways, ethnically, sexual orientation. And I have friends in my apartment complex who had never heard the story of Jesus, and they're not from Pakistan, they're actually from Atlanta, okay? So, and much less people who have a friend that actually loves Jesus. So those two things, people far from God who've never heard the gospel because they don't have a friend who knows Jesus, and also church people who are disconnected. And that got my attention. If we can be a part of doing church in a fresh way that will help kind of move the needle in some of those areas, I'm in. And so that's really what we're going after. Todd and I would say that the missional aspect of it's the tip of the spear. It's the mobilization of the church to live out the gospel amongst their neighbors. And we define neighbors geographically and relationally, both ends. So Todd, that's a lot to kind of a big front porch. Todd knows a lot more about the details, but that's kind of the story of how we've gotten started and kind of what's driving us. It's really the mission of God, people living out the gospel in their neighborhoods. It's what our passion is.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Todd, tell us a little bit, kind of explain the model. What does it look like? What does it look like on a week in, week out basis?
Yeah.
Love to just hear a little bit about that.
A lot of what we've already heard, we kind of fell into it. COVID pushed us into what are we going to do? And so having David lead out this idea of not a church in every town, but a church on every street, really began to help us focus in on who our audience is. We would be one of those churches that streams from our live setting at one of our campuses. But then we turn over in the worship portion where, David's on the camera just asking, hey, you just heard the message. Now, what did you hear? And what are you going to do about it? So those two questions primarily, like, what's your next step and what did you hear? And that's just the worship component. We think that a healthy microsite would be one that isn't just a Sunday, right? But it's a Wednesday night, it's a Thursday night discipleship time, it's Saturday evening dinner. It's ongoing. It's doing life together where you work, play, and live. And so we really try to emphasize less on one day a week into just doing life and that missional value that David already mentioned. So. We do use the Sunday morning broadcast as an opportunity to kind of create common ground. But we really lean heavy into who's your neighbor. And so the model would be you can do this on any night of the week. And whether you're in a pub or whether you're in a living room or whether we have one that meets in a barn, like it's a really nice barn, but it's a barn. And, we just have a lot of fun, like wherever you are, God wants to be. And so why don't you invite him there and invite some people, have some food, and see what God does. So again, I know that it's not super clear, but we're kind of figuring it out on the way as we go. So
that's good. So if I understand correctly, so your stream, are all the home churches receive the worship via stream, or can they also do on demand and do that at another time during the week?
Yes,
both and or either or?
Both and. They can stream live, roughly right around 9 o'clock. We go live, and then anytime throughout the week on YouTube, we have several platforms that they can engage with, but primarily YouTube has kind of been the one that people gravitate towards, and they could on demand anytime.
Yeah, Todd, I don't think any of our home gatherings do worship at 9 a.m., do they? Does anybody do it live? Most of them are like mine meets at 10:30, and then there's Sunday afternoon and Wednesday night for the worship portion.
Yeah, initially it was, we're not sure this is going to work. So I think everybody pushed their time a little later just so there was a buffer. But yeah, we 28 out of the 30 gatherings we have meet at different times other than 9 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is one question about the kind of the production. So is it everything live streamed, or is the worship pre-produced, or announcements pre-produced, or any of those kinds of things that goes out in the stream?
Yeah, so we actually renovated one of our auditoriums, our Sugarloaf campus. We renovated that to have 3 distinct, for lack of a better word, sets in that room that are designed for the online experience, the worship experience. And for a long time, I was pre-capturing a beginning kind of host section, a middle host section, an ending host section, and I hadn't even seen the sermon yet. So at the end of the teaching, I was like, hey, what great teaching. I didn't know if it sucked or not, but I had to assume it was going to be phenomenal, right? So anyway, that was kind of yucky. But then when we built the new set, we started going full live. So a guy named Travis and I will go on at 4 minutes till top of the hour, and then we'll do a little section in the middle. We do have kids stuff for 12 Stone Homes, so everything that can happen in buildings can also happen at 12 Stone Homes. So there's a video for kids. We say to parents, hey, push the pause button. We're about to start teaching. Hey, get the kids set. And, we have some resources for them, get them set so they can actually have an experience. I tell you, the thing that we've learned that surprised me a little bit about kids ministry is that home gatherings really enjoy having kids in the worship. And as y'all know, most churches, the whole time kids are separated from families, but we have a real intergenerational opportunity here for the kids to be in the worship. Then families or whoever, they'll hit the pause button, they'll get their kids set up, and then they'll come back and watch the teaching. So yeah, it's 100% right now. It goes live. It's premiered at 9 a.m. And the whole worship, teaching, everything is like a worship service that's captured. And then at 10:15ish, it's on demand on YouTube and at 12stone.com.
Yeah, Greg, I would say that one of the things that 12 Stone's leadership has done for us is they have said, we are one church with 2 equal expressions. And that language really gave some feet, some legs to 12 Stone Home. But it also kind of said, hey, we better get our act together, right? Like we had to create an equal expression. So working with Next Gen Ministries and figuring out how do we continue to build a church for our kids is a big value of ours as well.
Very good. Jeff, any questions that you wanted to pose?
No, I love what you guys are doing. We, the church I'm working with here, we use a barn as well for one of our home churches. The most intriguing thing I've heard about a location, laundromat while ago. I think it sounds funny. I think there's potential. I think one of the fun things about Microsite is we can figure some things out like that. And David, I agree. The kids ministry is fascinating. I think the idea of the kids in the worship and then having a teaching time for them separate is, again, it's that best of the church with the resources, large church, combined with the best of what's going on in a very small church. I think that's where the win is at.
I've got one question, then we'll move to Q&A, and this may come up with the Q&A as well. But I'd love to know, what are the things that you still don't have figured out? What are the things you're still trying to troubleshoot for? Let's just go with that question.
Yeah, let me give you, Todd, I may be speaking out of turn here, so tell me to stop. We're thinking into the future. We're aggressively thinking expansion. So, for example, let's take a town of maybe it's 143 square miles. We're thinking about what would it look like to plant 2 to 3 part-time staff there and tell them, hey, you go love the city, you go work in the city, and you figure out how to create 12 Stone Home in a particular city and saturate that city with people living out the gospel in their neighborhoods. So with that, part of the reason we're thinking that way is the pain point of how do you scale this to the place where we're effectively mentoring leaders and equipping leaders? And we do have our first layer of equipping that's been, we've had 3 retreats for leaders so far. And so those leaders have been equipped. We have equipping that's on video now, that's on YouTube, so that we can actually, and we won't do equipping without coaching. So the content has to be with coaching. It can't be just content. It has to be the coaching as well. And so the pain point has been in a staff that is created to get everybody to come back to their campus, to their physical campus, 12 Stone Live. How do we reposition staff, and can we reposition staff to actually do what it takes to to do ministry in a very deeply pastoral, personal way with 12 Stone Home gathering leaders. That's a big pain point for us.
Nate, let's move to Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can see it. Jeff, can you see the brush fire?
I can.
Okay. Why don't you? I'm not able to see it, so why don't you pop the questions? And
Sure.
we'll go from
Yeah.
there.
Why don't we start with really great questions just on microsite strategy and multi-site strategy. How do you work with many churches' strategies? How are you working with your strategy in order to be diverse in age, culture, race, et cetera? I'm assuming when thinking about where to plant a microsite or how to operate in that context of wherever they're meeting, maybe.
David, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I do. That's a real, first of all, it's super challenging. I think we have to, I'm just start at 35,000 feet. That's where my mind goes. I think in general, we have to begin to invite people that are different than us to our table. And so I happen to live in an area that's very diverse. My home gathering at the worship time that we have on Sundays at the pub, we're not even close to as diverse as I want us to be. And so that means personally what I have to do is I have to invite people to my table that are different than me, and I try to do that consistently. From a strategic perspective, 12 Stone is a diverse church depending on the campus. And so what we'll do is we'll look for people that are diverse. We'll purposefully invite them to the table to say, hey, how do we lead this out in a way that, because people want to be around people that are like them in some ways, which feels like a dichotomy with diversity. But I think we have to go there with that.
Yeah. And the fact that you're using you got such an investment in the next gen ministries as well, create some of that cross-generational opportunity with your model too. That's good.
Let me weigh in on that just real quick. The church that I'm leading the house church stuff here in Colorado. One of the things that we thought early on is that we'll open all these churches and then all these microsites, and then all the church people are going to go to the microsites. And what we discovered is we open these microsites and the church people go, oh, that's cool. I want to go back to that big building. But the cool part was that the hosts immediately began inviting their neighbors, inviting their friends, inviting their coworkers. All of a sudden, we discovered that we were having a majority of the people who came to our house churches never came to have never been to the big building, to the big site. So when you talk about diversity, it's interesting because usually the question is, how do we get a different demographic to walk into this big building where most of the people don't look like them? With a microsite, that is not the equation. The equation is if you have a diverse circle of friends, then you're going to have a diverse house church. And so I think the evangelistic piece is fascinating. We probably, to our detriment, we have lowered the bar way down for hosts to leaning toward being a Christ follower. And the reason we've done that is because people who aren't Christ followers are surrounded by people who aren't Christ followers. And so we wanted to invite them into their home, let the content come from the TV, but it answers a lot of that diversity question as well. Yeah, I wanted to ask the Resi guys to dive in. Just a quick side note, our church just started recently switched to Resi after a weekend of watching everything freeze online and watch all of our engagement numbers drop to zero. And then we engaged at Resi, and all of a sudden we don't have that ever happen again. So that is a huge piece. There's some technical questions in the chat. I wonder if one of the guys from Resi would dive in on one of those technical questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I know there was a question about delay. There was also a few technical questions too for David and Todd on how you guys are actually getting your stream out to your audience. I know we were going to have another member of your team on who was having I think a surgery or something. So hopefully you know the gist of some of these, but if not, we can get the answers too. But in terms of how delay works, I know that was one of the main questions. With the Resi platform, one of the ways that we ensure reliability of streams is we take advantage of a short delay. So typical streams use a protocol called RTMP, if we want to get really nerdy and technical about it. And they work over a consistent stream. So it sends a consistent stream of data to a server. And the problem with that is if you have packet loss at any point along the way, and a lot of times, if you're doing something like a lot of people watching at home or on a cell phone or, even in these microsites, that happens. happens, then any interruption, any packet loss along the way, and then all of a sudden that stream is dropped. And you have buffering whales and you have interruptions, and that causes a drop of engagement. We actually see that. We see 30% of people leaving by one buffering whale, almost 70% of people leaving by the second buffering whale. And so what we do is we provide a way that sends that data on a short delay, uploads it to the cloud, and then it handles it kind of like a file transfer. So it makes sure that 100% of that video data, all those frames make it to the cloud. And then instead of relying on a perfect connection to you, people are watching from the cloud in just the same way that they would watch like a Netflix video that's hosted in the cloud. So it's pretty cool. And the delay for web platform sends on about a 90-second delay. And that ensures that we could unplug the Ethernet cable for 90 seconds, plug it back in, and we still get 100% of that content to the cloud. And that's the way a lot of these microsites are starting out. They're sending their content to just like a web player, watching on the website, on Church Online platform, or on YouTube or something like that. And I'm actually not sure how the 12 Stone guys are doing it, so that'd be good to ask. But and then in terms of multi-site, when you actually have a physical multi-site decoder, the delay becomes whatever your delay is between campuses. So whenever you start playback at your broadcast site to whenever you begin playback at that receiving site, that's as long as your delay is, and then your internet connection can go out at either side for as long as that delay and still provide a perfect stream. So that's a little bit of a basis, but if you want to get into even more detail, and we make it high level too, so whether you're a pastor or whether you're a technical person, love to have you for a demo, and we'll have some information on that later.
Yeah, at 12 Stone, I know that we do have the decoder from campus to campus, from broadcast campus to the other sites. As far as online, how we're broadcasting out to the microsites, what you said, Nate, sounded fantastic.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say we'd have to find out.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, like I said, we were hoping to also have some some information on that, but we can make sure that you guys get that. But I'm pretty sure most of them are watching through that web platform feed, and you can even use a lot of microsites use like Apple TVs or Roku's or something like that at each venue. So it works out that way. And then you just set an expectation where you say, hey, once we have 50 people in this site, that's when we should maybe turn this into a more formal multi-site. Cool. Well, we can go ahead into a couple other questions here too. And I know there's a few that I'd love to just engage anybody. So David, Todd, feel free to jump in, but Casey and Tony as well. I think just even high level, one that I'd love to ask is, how do you measure success from your online audience or microsite?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this, and David, you can correct me. But I think one of the things that's been a really great question from the get-go. With small groups, oftentimes people think microchurch, they think with small groups, we have to undo that altogether, right? These are two different things, and we come back to worship, community, impact. But helping them unpack those three areas and define success, because when you're so evangelistic, kind of to Jeff's point, when you're so evangelistic in a home gathering, you may not see 3 people accept Christ in a year. Who knows? And maybe you do, maybe you see 10, but it's not going to be the hundreds that we're experiencing at the other live campuses. So sometimes we really kind of have, that's where David mentioned coaching. We really have to right size in coaching the conversation from our staff coach or a lay leader who's coaching a microsite leader. Hey, this week, Andrea prayed out loud. That's a big deal. And helping people see the little steps that people are taking that they would have never had the opportunity to take at a live expression, at a live campus. And so helping them see, this week we get to celebrate our first baptism happening at one of our microsites. That's huge, that's a big deal. And so just kind of helping them see the short-term steps that are helping make a long-term disciple.
Hey, can I add? I think there's definitely, Todd, we talk a lot about the leader and the people taking their next step towards Jesus. So that's a very customized. So there's some people that they're a little bit hungover on Sunday morning, so they show up. That's a win. So the people that are showing up sometimes in my home gathering, I'm just glad they're there. And so that's a huge win. I think metrics organizationally are a little bit different, and we're trying to figure that out. So and I'm just going to go to the kind of the belly of this thing. Is this thing even financially possible? Can we take a city and put micro-site churches, 12-stone home there, and can we afford to do it long term? That's something we have to be able to discover. What does it look like as far as multiplication? I love Todd's heart in that he's kind of like, hey, I want our home gatherings to have grandchildren. And so, as you know, once a room gets filled, we have to think about, okay, who's the next leader that's going to take this and put this in their neighborhood? And so I think there's organizational metrics that we're trying to figure out right now. There's discipleship metrics, but there's also that very personal. Every home gathering is very different. And that's why the individual coaching is so important to help leaders understand, just be encouraged. Hey, sometimes if somebody shows up, that's a huge win.
I think it's interesting that, and one of the things we're seeing in the church at large is this move from the platform, kind of the platform, to the more pastoral kind of setting. And it's even been accelerated in COVID down to this kind of personal level. And that's exactly what you guys are saying, and why this Microsite model has the potential to be really, really powerful, because it gives people the opportunity to have that connection at that very personal kind of level.
Yeah, just some quick metrics. Metrics, if this is helpful, Dave and I've talked about how many microsites are birthing more microsites, right? We're trying to figure out what our number is, but how many people are actually walking through disciple making process? Just to give some really practical things. And then the last one is, how many leaders are we raising up? Those are 3 areas that we're really trying to focus in on at 12 Stone.
That's good. Just talking about, helping people grow and helping disciple people and move people through a discipleship process. Another question that we have, maybe our last question here, unless we want to take some extra time for another one, but what are some ways you're helping people in either your online campus, again, to Tony and Casey, if you guys have anything here, or for the Microsite, either online or Microsite, how are you helping them connect, feel a part of what you're doing, and begin serving as part of a team?
Yeah, I can kind of try to take a stab at this one. I think for us, prior to COVID, our whole, service was built around like, how is this for the first time guest? How is this for somebody who's never walked into a church, or the first time returning to church for 20 years or however long that happened to be? So when we transitioned to online, the question became, how do we take all of that and make it online? So we host a class called Next every Sunday that you can go to and ask any of those burning questions you have about church, whatever that happens to be. We have a lot of people, we drive everyone to our app so they can get their different content throughout the week, stuff like that. We get them into a group. All of our groups transitioned online, those small groups that you guys were talking about. And then the interesting part of this that we ran into was, okay, how do we get those people serving on a team? Because for the most part, most of your teams are, have to be in person to an extent or in the area. But we actually now have 2 people, one in the Philippines and one in Denmark. Oh shoot! It's one of those countries in Europe who are actually online hosts for our online services now. So they're able to say like, hey, they came across our stream in whatever way, got connected into a small group, and then transitioned into a team and are able to serve from. I think our 9:30 service, one of the guys, Al from Scotland, it might be evening for him, but for us, it's a 9:30 service, and he's able to serve in that way. And that kind of like goes into the previous question as well. It's like, how are you getting people connected? How are you measuring that success and with the online service? And I think if we have people from across the world serving at our church, that's successful for sure.
That's awesome.
2 just really quick things on that. One of the things that we're learning in terms of content, it's not just about more content, in terms of engagement, but it's content that's shaped in such a way that it drives to connection. So every content piece that you're putting out there has to have some invitation, some call to action, some way for someone to take a step toward being engaged and connected to a person. That's really, I think, really important. The other thing I think too is we talk about the overall online thing. We've kind of focused here primarily on worship experience, but as David and Todd were saying, they're really trying to create this, Monday through Saturday experience as well. And one of the things a lot of churches are telling us is some of the things that they would traditionally have done in person are done better at different times during the week and actually have better attendance and engagement if they're done online. So for example, churches that have some kind of a new member process or kind of a connection process, they're telling us that their attendance is much better online, and the level of transparency that people are able to kind of share their story, even in this kind of initial gathering, is pretty powerful. And so I think there's some things we really want to make sure we're thinking not just on the weekend, but what are the ways that we engage disciples throughout the week? A really important piece.
Hey, Greg, we have a friend here that's really smart. He says the worship service, if you look at ESPN, the worship service experience on Sundays, Wednesdays, whenever somebody engages that, it's kind of like Sports Center, but then you have to have other opportunities throughout the week, whether it's social media. So we're thinking about the 5 rhythms of a disciple and what does that look like and how do we get content out throughout the week to kind of push people towards that process.
Perfect. Well, I wish we had more time. I'd love to know what your 5 rhythms of the disciple are, but maybe we'll be able to have another conversation and talk about that. But one of the things as we close, I want to give the Resi team an opportunity here in a second to talk about how you can connect with them. But one of the things that Jeff and I are trying to do is help you just figure out how to thrive in your current reality. We've talked about a lot of models in terms of multi-site, and we don't think there's any one model that's right. And just as we did in our very first book, the right model is going to be the one that's right for you. And so one of the things that we're doing with churches is helping them to have those kind of conversations to discern, figure out where you're at, dream about what could be, think about what are you going to do, and then kind of develop the plans and then drive to execution on those kinds of things. We'd love to have a conversation with you about that at some point in time if you'd like, kind of do a free assessment with you. We're doing these calls. We're also doing some coaching, consulting, and we're also in the process of putting together a cohort if you wanted to be able to go along this journey into this new space with other churches that are trying to figure this out as well. You can, on the screen, I think you'll be able to see the way you can connect with us to do a phone call. We'd love to do a follow-up with you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Greg. Yeah, and then if you're interested from a Resi perspective, whether it's Multisite or Microsite or whatever other models that you may be exploring, we'd love to connect with you from Resi. Again, we're experts in streaming, experts in digital distribution, but we have church in our heart and in our blood because that's where we came from. We were founded out of a church down in Dallas, Texas, and we just want to help you get connected with whatever methods are best to connect with your audience and build engagement and build growth. So we'd love to connect with you. Check us out, resi.io/demo.
Very good. Thanks so much. And we'll look forward to having an opportunity to connect with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.